Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much to KITA for this invitation and for the organization of this seminar on the EU-Korea FTA. It is very timely indeed, as was said in the introduction, as this FTA will start to be applied this Friday in just 2 or 3 days. And company on both sides in Europe and in Korea are preparing and have to prepare for taking advantage of this agreement. So I'm going to tell you today about what the EU is doing to prepare the implementation of this agreement. And to start with, I will briefly summarize what there is in this FTA. I imagine you know, but it's always good to sketch out the main features of this agreement in order to know then what are the challenges in implementing it. So what first part of my presentation, what is in this free trade agreement? So first of all, this FTA will eliminate custom duties, tariffs, at the border on both sides in a maximum of 5 years for most of the goods. 98.7% of the tariff lines of the goods will be eliminated in 5 years, but already at the beginning, so this Friday, 70% of the duties in terms of tariff line, so you know we have custom tariff lines, will be duty-free. Not all of them had a duty, some of them were already at zero duty. For instance, in Europe, we don't have duty on ships. Ships, I mean, not ships, but ships that sail, which is a big export of Korea. So for the shipbuilding industry, at least for the shipbuilders, on Friday, nothing will change in terms of tariffs. But for many other products, there will be an elimination of the immediate elimination of duty. So that's the first element. And that's the very classic element we have in free trade agreements. The EU average tariff is 6.5%, and the Korean average tariff is 12.2%. But there are great variations from one sector to another. So ships on the EU are duty-free. Agricultural products in Korea, the duty can be very high, up to 30, 40, 50%, sometimes 50% duty, you can imagine. So there is a great variation. This is just an average. And of course, in order to get this duty-free, goods have to respect rules of origin, which are defined in the agreement, which means they have to be considered from originating in Korea, if it's a product exported from Korea to the EU, or the reverse, if it's an EU product that wants to get the duty-free treatment at the Korean border. And it's very important, these rules of origin are part of the agreement. And for each, you have general rules and then product-specific rules. So for instance, for broadly speaking, for agricultural products have to be wholly obtained, so they have to be grown in Korea if it's a plant or if it's an animal or a product from animal. It has to come from a plant grown in Korea. That's easy for agricultural products. But for industrial products, it is more complex because many products are integrating parts, sometimes produced in third countries. Cars, for instance, they will always integrate some elements, maybe coming from Japan, or an engine, or an electronic component which is not made in Korea. So in general, we have different kinds of rules, but there is always, for many products, a certain added proportion of the added value of the product should be achieved in Korea. So, for instance, for cars, I think it's 55% of the added value of the car must be achieved in Korea, and you can integrate parts coming from third countries up to 45%. Then, okay, that's a slide showing a bit the tariff elimination for Korean exports to the EU. So you see a huge proportion is going to happen of the tariffs is going to be eliminated on this Friday, in a few days, at the EU border for Korean exports. One of the first elements, auto parts. I didn't put all the products, there are so many, but auto parts will be liberalized this Friday. All duty will be eliminated on auto parts this Friday. Wireless device, refrigerators coming from Korea to Europe, there will be an elimination immediately. After 3 years, I've put some flagship products, mid and large cars, medium and large cars. The duty will be eliminated, but actually the elimination starts already Friday because there will be a gradual elimination. So we will not keep the tariff for 3 years. We will eliminate 1/3 of the tariff this Friday, 1/3 the following year, and then another third. So there is a benefit for cars already, for medium and large cars already starting from Friday. And then products like small cars are liberalized over a period of 5 years. So on the at the Korean border, so for EU products exported to Korea, it's also a very steep elimination immediately on day first. It is not the same. You have to know that the tariffs are not eliminated in the same way necessarily on each side. So each side has a different schedule, even though it is more or less there is a kind of correspondence. But for instance, Korea has much longer transition period for agricultural products. So for instance, you see there is up to EU will have liberalized everything after 5 years. There will be no product which have a duty after 5 years, except rice, because Korea didn't want to liberalize rice, so EU also excluded rice, but actually we don't produce much rice. But Korea has much longer products for pork, for instance, or for plywood. Okay, so that's for the tariff elimination part. Then this FTA also will tackle certain what we call non-tariff barriers. What are they? It's basically different standards in certain areas can act as a barrier. And so, for instance, in the automotive sector, EU standards and Korean standards most of them are different. So you cannot, you have a different, you must reinvent almost entirely your car if you want to sell it on the Korean markets when you are an EU car maker. You must have a different crash test, you must have different windows, different bumper, etc. And maybe your car meets the standards, but you have to retest it, which is very costly. So this, of course, once you have eliminated the tariff, can really be a problem if you want to have a free movement of goods. So, and you have that, I took the car sector, but you have that in all sectors. As it is almost impossible to eliminate all these barriers, because they are, we call them barriers, but in general they come from a legitimate sovereign policy. If we have certain safety standards for cars, it is a sovereign choice of the Ministry of Transport of each party to choose what they think after debating sometimes in the parliament and with the civil society and with the industry to choose a certain approach to safety, which then will translate into different standards. So the same for environment. Each country may have different, Korea and EU might have different approach, different views on how to protect environment and have different solution. So we have been choosing 3 sectors in which we have tried to reduce differences in terms of different standards, and the rest we left it out because it's too complicated to agree an equivalence on all standards. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of standards. And it can be very political to accept as equivalent the standards of one another. Just to give you an example, in the EU, European Union was a big free trade zone, if you want, at the beginning, between 6 founding members, and then it enlarged up to 27 members. And we also did eliminate tariffs first, and then we realized precisely that different standards were preventing goods from being sold on each other's markets. So then we decided to align our standards, and it took us something like 20, 30 years to try to harmonize at EU level standards. And it also forced EU countries to give more competence to EU institutions in order to have joint policy responses in areas like environment policy, health policy, safety policy, industrial standards. Because if you don't have this, if you don't try to have a common legislative view and a common approach, you cannot really agree on having the same standards. And so that's very difficult. It means abandoning sovereignty, or at least agree to discuss together with other countries the problems that legislators face. And that's not easy. I mean, it's something that takes time. So you can imagine that with 2 years of negotiation in an FTA, you cannot achieve what takes 20 years, 30 years. And especially we are so far away, EU and Korea. So it's, I mean, it's not easy. So we have chosen automotive sector, which is key for EU and for Korea, and we have agreed that a list of 40-something critical standards for cars and parts, we will consider EU standards and Korean standards as equivalent. So they are different, but we consider them as equivalent. It means if you produce a car in Europe following one of these 40-something standards of the EU, when they come to Korea, you don't have to recertify them, you don't have to retest them, you don't have to even really bother about what is the Korean standards. It will be immediately considered as equivalent. And vice versa, of course. Korean cars and parts. So the parts is very important. I think the car parts sector, there will be this Friday a big impact, because there will be this elimination of duty immediately this Friday and these standards that will be equivalent. So we have achieved that, and that's a big result for the car industry. And we have agreed that when there are new standards, because we continue all the time to develop new standards. For instance, now the future of car industry is electric cars, and their legislators have to take a number of decisions. One of them is, for instance, what will be the standards for chargers, because you have all the infrastructure, all the gas stations, they will now be equipped over the coming years with electric chargers or battery change, a station to change the battery in the first step, but then electric chargers, and you have to choose a standard. It's like the plug, the same thing as the plug for electric appliances. And if we don't have the same standards, this would be, again, a barrier. This would be a problem. So we have agreed to cooperate, to discuss. EU and Korea will discuss on any new standard and try to align approaches. And we will do so within the framework of the UNECE, which is a UN body, international body setting standards for cars. So we have also a kind of commitment in the future to always try not to again diverge in terms of approach for cars standards. So that's for the automotive sector, a very important part of the agreement. Then for all electrical and electronic products, they have to be certified in EU and Korea for electromagnetic compatibility and for electric safety. But also for other things. For instance, mobile phones, they also have to be certified for telecom. There are many standards for electrical products. So we have chosen only two, electromagnetic compatibility and electric safety, and we have agreed that certifications done in Korea will be recognized in the EU and vice versa. Certification done in the EU will be recognized in Korea. There is a vast range of products affected by that positively, because computers, phones, cars, machines, industrial machines, household appliances, they all have to be certified at least for electric safety, and when they emit waves, for electromagnetic compatibility. So it's a huge gain for companies on both sides to avoid to have to import the product in the other party, apply for certification in testing laboratories, wait for the results, with all the costs and time lost that is involved. And finally, for pharmaceutical and medical device, we have some commitments that the health authorities on both sides will be more transparent in the decision for setting the reimbursement price for medicine and medical device. You know that the healthcare and medical industry, they depend a lot on the decision by health authorities to reimburse or not, and at which price each drug or each medical device. And so it's important for them to have a guarantee that they can have a dialogue, that the industry can have a dialogue with the Ministry of Health and have clear justifications for the decision to reimburse or not, and at which price. So this will help industry on both sides, these commitments. But there is no, for medical device and drugs, there is no equivalent agreement to recognize tests, for instance, done in each party. Not necessarily. So that was for goods, trading goods. We eliminate tariffs for all products, almost. And we also eliminate some non-tariff barriers in the sectors I have mentioned. But we will also, another very important part of this agreement is the liberalization of services. And for services, there is no custom duty when you sell, when it comes to banking or legal advice or transport services. There is no custom duty at the border. There are more, and what we find is restrictions in doing businesses. These restrictions can take different forms. It can be a restriction in the license, for instance, for telecom operators or for banks, they need a license to open a branch. It can be restriction on movement of people. You may need to move some, if you are a bank, you may need to, or a legal company, you may need to move some experts from Korea to Europe if you want to propose legal service in Europe. There may be restrictions in the right to exert a business advice. In Korea, you have to have a Korean degree in law if you want to provide certain types of legal service to companies. So if you have a British degree in law, you cannot provide that. You can have restrictions in ownership, etc. So there are many restrictions that will be removed. It is almost impossible to summarize that with a simple figure, because it's not a duty. You cannot. I cannot give you a figure, but I can tell you that there is further. There will be further liberalization of the financial service sector, of the legal sector, of the accounting sector, and telecommunication. So in transport also. So many sectors will be more open. And this creates opportunities on both sides, of course. Service firms of both parties will be able to more easily extend their activities in the EU or in Korea. And also for industry who are consuming services, because many of these services are professional services. The cost will go down. So concretely, for instance, in Korea, there will be more competition in the legal service sector. So for companies, there will be more choice, and probably prices will go down, which is good for the companies who consume these services. Then the FTA provides some rules. So both EU and Korea have competition rules and intellectual property rights. We do protect, we do, in Korea, it's the Korea Fair Trade Commission is watching what happens on the market and is fighting cartels, abuse of dominant positions. The same in the EU. We have the Directorate General for Competition in the European Commission that fights anti-competitive practices. And in the FTA, and there is an agreement between the two authorities to cooperate in cases of mutual interest. But the FTA go further, and there will be a possibility to cooperate in anti-competitive practices which affect trade between the EU and Korea. For intellectual property rights, a number of intellectual property rights are already protected on each side. Patents are protected. There is a system of patents for trademarks, to protect trademarks, or designs, etc. And some rules to enforce these rights, of course, on both sides. So this is not new, but there is an agreement to cooperate further in implementing, in protecting these rules. And there are also some new intellectual property rights that will be protected with the FTA, notably geographical indications. Geographical indications are agricultural products, mainly, produced in certain regions, like Bordeaux wine. It's produced in Bordeaux. Bordeaux is a region in France. Or prosciutto di Parma, it's a ham produced in Parma, it's a region of Italy. And now, with the FTA, the use of this name will be restricted only to the products produced in the relevant region. So it will affect, not clear how it will affect businesses, but at least if third countries want to use these names, it will not be possible anymore. Okay, then I would highlight two more elements of this FTA. We have dispute settlement rules. So it's like in the World Trade Organization. You know that the World Trade Organization, one of the major innovations when it was created, before we had the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff, or the GATT, General Agreement on Tariff, and there was no, if somebody was not respecting the commitment, there was no sanction. And then with the WTO, a dispute settlement was created. So when a party is not happy, when a WTO member is not happy about the way another member comply with WTO agreement, he can ask for the establishment of a panel of independent lawyers which will act as a tribunal. They will judge, and their decisions are binding. And we have that in the FTA, a bilateral dispute settlement. So this will give teeth to this agreement. It means all the provision there, they can, if there is one party doesn't implement it, the other party can, of course, first try to solve the issue by consultation, but if this doesn't work, it's possible to ask for the establishment of a panel. And then there are also institutions, that's very important. There are FTA institutions, so every year there will be a trade committee, so the Minister of Trade of Korea will meet the Trade Commissioner of the EU, and they will discuss the implementation of this agreement. And 12 specialized committees will meet before to prepare this meeting. And these committees will discuss any issue linked to the proper enforcement of these agreements. So there will be a working group on automotives, for instance. So if there is any question in terms of new standards in the car industry that pose problems, this can be discussed in the committee for automotives. There are committees on trade in goods, committees on customs, if there is a problem in the implementation of rules of origin, if the two customs have different interpretations and they need to solve that, there is a committee for that. So all these are institutions which will help EU and Korea discuss in detail, technically and politically, all the implementation issues and also any cooperation that may be needed to ensure the FTA properly functions. So what do we expect in terms of impact? I will go there to this slide. First, bilateral trade will be boosted and will grow. So one of the studies that we made in the EU estimates that on the short term, trade will be increased by 30 billion euro. Now it stands at 65 billion, so it's almost 50% of boost. in bilateral trade, so on both sides. And on the long term, there is an estimate that the trade will be boosted, will double as compared with a situation without an FTA, because trade is always growing, with or without FTA. But if you compare the two, it would be doubled. Now, these are general figures, but of course, on the short term, most competitive sectors of each side will immediately boost their exports, especially those that are price sensitive. And obviously, the relatively weaker sectors will face more competition and will have to adjust. That's what you have. As the two economies are relatively complementary, so we don't have the same strengths. For instance, the EU, just to give you an example, we can look at this figure. EU exports a lot of service. EU is very good in services. Korea less. So there are many services that exist in the EU that don't exist in Korea, or not with the same features. So this is an example of complementarity. On the other hand, ships, EU doesn't produce anymore much industrial ships or transport ships. We do some cruise ships, but not ships used to transport, while Korea still does a lot. On the other hand, Korea is very good in electronics. Korea exports a lot of course, large TV screens, now tablets, Samsung, LG, they are challenging Apple in the tablet screen, in the smartphone. In Europe, unfortunately, we didn't develop our industry in this area. So we will not be so much affected because we don't produce, we don't have the same strength, basically. We don't have industry in this area. Also, Korea is very strong in chips. That's one of the major exports. Not chips, but chips now, electronic chips. And we consume that. We're happy to have, we use them, we incorporate them in many products. EU exports a lot of machines to Korea. We are very good at that. Korea, of course, produces machines, industrial machines, but we produce a much wider range and very specific types of machine or parts that are used in Korean industries. So for these products, there is not really competition. There is more complementarity. So there will be, of course, some sectors there will be front clash, a bit clash competition. Agriculture, cars for the medium segment, there will be. But there are many sectors for which there are complementarities. There will not be immediately a too harsh competition. So if I come back to this slide, the sectors which are competitive will be boosted immediately, notably compared with other third countries. For instance, Korea, compared with Japan, with Taiwan, with China, we'll have an advantage on the EU market, which is the biggest market in the world, by far. In general, when you read figures, US is labeled as the first economy because the 27 member states of the EU there is never a consolidated figure, but if you consolidate that, we are the biggest market and economy in the world. So having duty-free access to this big market for Korea will create is a real benefit and will give a real advantage compared to Korean competitors. And so the costs for consumers and users will decrease for all these products and services. So this will boost the competitiveness of the two economies. There will be wider choice, more products, more services, larger choice, lower prices, more competition. All this for the competitiveness of each side is very good. And there will be adjustments, of course, as I said. So not everything is positive. There will be adjustments for certain sectors, indeed, that lag behind. And on the longer term, we expect this FTA to increase investment. I believe in Korea in particular, because Korea is becoming, is already attracting a lot of investment. EU is the first investor in Korea in the world, and will most likely continue to invest in Korea. In short, these are, I mean, we really expect positive effects of this FTA. We expect economic growth, consumer benefits in terms of wider choice and lower cost, job creation, which will be created by the boost in trade and in growth, more competition, and investment on the longer term. Okay, that was a bit what is in the FTA and what we expect will be the impact. Now I will talk about what we are doing on the EU side as government, from the government side, to prepare for the implementation. I will not speak for the businesses because I'm not a business. I'm from the EU delegation, the EU embassy. I work for the government. So I think maybe Mr. Geyer will tell you more about, from the business side, what preparations are going on. So in the EU, we have adopted a number of legislation which are implementing the FTA. So this is very legalistic. You have the presentation in your book. I will not maybe develop much, but we have to change a number of things to implement the FTA. We have to change our tariff at the border. We have the tariff database. Each customs of each member state are connected, and we have one IT system basically that indicates at the border the tariff to apply for each goods, depending on the origin. We have amended our regulation on rules of origin to incorporate the provision of the FTA on rules of origin. We have added the Korean geographical indication. There are some kinds of teas and ginseng which are protected from Korean origin. So we have to amend our legislation on geographical indication to take this into account. We had to make sure that all legislation on services are in line with the FTA commitment in services. So we did all this. All this is done now, and we are ready from a legislative point of view in the EU. Then, as government, we have been doing, and we will continue to do, some communication efforts to explain the content of the FTA to governments, but mostly to businesses. And I would say one of the critical elements is rules of origin, because if you don't respect the rules of origin, you will not get the duty-free treatment. And in this FTA, there is a very specific feature, and I think you will have a presentation later. The fourth presentation from the Korean custom will enter into detail on this. But you have, each business has to be approved exporter in order to be able to benefit from the preferential treatment. In Korea, the Korean customs will approve Korean exporters, and they will check if the company knows the rules of origin, and if the company has an internal control system to ensure they apply these rules. And then the company will be able to self-certify on the invoice or on any document accompanying the good exported that the good is originating in Korea. And the same in the EU. In the EU, customs from France will approve French company, will certify as certified exporter, French exporter, or German customs will do that for German exporters. And when the good arrive, if it's a Korean good arrives in one EU country, in Belgium, the custom officer will look at the invoice, will recognize the declaration made by the Korean company, and if they have a doubt, they may ask the Korean customs to check. For instance, you know that one of the big risks of this agreement is that a Chinese company wants to gain, of course, want to cheat. It happens, and may want to declare a good as originating in Korea and make a fake declaration. And you can lose a lot of money. We can lose, the EU, or vice versa. Korea can lose a lot of money in custom if, I don't know, an Israeli company declares itself from EU origin. So custom can check if they have a doubt, if they see that the boat is not a European boat, but or if there is any intelligence telling them there is something strange, they can ask the custom of the other party to verify. But it is very important to be approved exporter and to know, and this means knowing the rules of origin and applying towards the custom to get the approval. Otherwise, you cannot get the preferential duty. And it's a pity because that's one of the main benefits of the FTA. Yes, and then of course we are doing some press activity. And I already talked about the institutions. We will have 13 EU-Korea committees, so it really means EU and Korea will cooperate much more from a regulatory point of view, and this will be helpful to tackle non-tariff barriers. So that's, in a nutshell, what we are doing in the EU to prepare for the implementation of the FTA. And thank you for your attention.